The only sound on the firing line was wind. Not the sharp crack of a rifle, not the barked commands of drill sergeants, not even the murmur of conversation between the 18 men spread along the prone shooting positions of Fort Whitfield's advanced sniper qualification range. Just wind, low, steady, dragging sand across the concrete and making the distant flagposts shudder like nervous recruits on their first day.
Who the hell is that, Staff Sergeant?
No idea.
And then a car door closed in the gravel lot behind them. Every head turned, not because a car door was unusual, but because of who stepped out of it. A woman, late 20s, maybe early 30s, wearing faded jeans, a plain olive green t-shirt and dusty hiking boots that had clearly never been inside a military installation. Her hair was long, dark brown, slightly wind-blown, hanging past her shoulders. She had a tan complexion, the kind that came from years under open sky, not a tanning bed. Over one shoulder she carried a hard rifle case, matte black, long enough to hold something serious. Over the other, a small canvas duffel. Master Sergeant Vince Holt lowered his spotting scope and squinted. Who the hell is that?
You see that, Davis? Who is that, Holt? She's carrying a rifle case. Sir, she's not on the manifest.
Staff Sergeant Davis, kneeling beside him with a clipboard, shook his head slowly. No idea. She's not on the roster. Holt watched her walk toward the range office like she owned the place. Calm, unhurried, not looking around for directions. That bothered him more than the civilian clothes.
That bothered him more than the civilian one. Wandered onto this range.
Because every outsider who wandered onto this range spent their first 30 seconds lost, looking for someone to talk to. She didn't. The range at Fort Whitfield was not a place civilians visited. It was a Tier 2 long-distance qualification facility, reserved for active duty snipers cycling through advanced recertification. The kind of place where the shortest shooting lane was 800 meters and the longest stretched past 2,000.
Past 2,000. At any given time, the line than people, in every single.
At any given time, there were more scoped rifles on the line than people, and every single one of them was government property. Probably some journalist, muttered Corporal Briggs from Lane 4, loud enough for the others to hear. Or a photographer. They love this stuff.
Official credentials, Captain Driscoll.
Very well, Sophia. Let's see. Read it again.
I need you to confirm it.
A few men chuckled. Sophia Langley did not hear the laughter. She was already inside the range office, sliding a sealed manila envelope across the counter to the range officer on duty, a captain named Driscoll. Driscoll opened it, scanned the single page inside, and his eyebrows climbed half an inch. Ma'am, where did you get this? It was couriered to my house in Prescott 4 days ago, Sophia said. I was told to present it upon arrival. Driscoll read the page again, then a third time. The letterhead was one he recognized but rarely saw, and the authorization stamp at the bottom was the kind that made phone calls unnecessary, because the person who signed it outranked everyone on this base by a wide margin. Wait here, he said, and disappeared into the back office with the envelope. Sophia waited, through the window, she could see the firing line, the men in their prone positions, the heat shimmer rising off the desert floor beyond the targets.
It only said that she was authorized to be here. Corporal Briggs was still running his mouth.
She had not fired a rifle in 11 months. She had not worn a uniform in longer than that. And the document Driscoll was now probably photographing and forwarding up the chain did not explain why she was here.
So what? My ex-wife brought her to the gym and couldn't touch her toes.
It only said that she was authorized to be. On the line, Corporal Briggs was still running his mouth. $20 says she's somebody's wife doing a ride-along. Happens every quarter. Some colonel's spouse wants to see where hubby plays soldier. The man next to him, a lance corporal named Fenton, shrugged. She brought her own case, though. So what? My ex-wife brought her own yoga mat to the gym and couldn't touch her toes. At military installations across the country, challenge coins are traded between service members as tokens of respect, unit pride, and shared experience. Some coins are common, handed out by company commanders at the end of a deployment. Others are rare, minted in limited runs for specific operations, specific teams, specific moments that only the people who were there would understand. A soldier's coin collection tells the story of their career the way rings on a tree tell its age. And on this range, every man carried at least one in his pocket like a talisman. Sophia carried none. She had given hers away, all of them, the night she signed her discharge papers. Every coin, every patch, every memento of 11 years in units whose names she could not say aloud. She kept the rifle because the rifle was not a memory. It was a skill. And skills, unlike memories, did not keep you awake at 3 in the morning. So let me get this straight, Staff Sergeant Davis said, leaning against the range tower railing with his arms crossed. Command sends us a civilian, no advance notice, no file, no unit patch, no rank, and we're supposed to just hand her a lane? Captain Driscoll nodded once. That's what the authorization says. Does it say what she's here for? Evaluation. Evaluation of what? The cafeteria. Driscoll did not smile.
All right, listen up. That's enough of that.
Davis, what's going on?
Something big is happening here. Pay attention.
Everyone, eyes on the commander.
We have been compromised.
She's been cleared for live fire on any lane, any distance, any platform available on this range. That's the extent of what I know. Davis exhaled through his nose. He had been running sniper qualification courses for 9 years. He had seen every type of shooter walk onto a military range.
Did she bring her own weapon, or are you gonna lend her a 22?
All right.
A few muffled laughs rippled through the line.
From special operations pipe hitters who could thread a needle at 1,000 meters to reserve weekend warriors who could barely zero their optics. He had never, in almost a decade, seen a woman in blue jeans handed range access by a document with that level of classification. He walked back to the firing line where the others were waiting. Listen up. We've got a walk-on. Female civilian. Command authorization. She's going to shoot a few lanes and then presumably leave. Treat her like any other evaluee. Corporal Briggs, who never missed a chance to open his mouth, grinned. She bring her own weapon, or are we lending her a 22? A few muffled laughs rippled through the line. Sophia appeared at the edge of the firing line 60 seconds later, carrying her rifle case. She set it down on the bench behind lane 12, unlatched it, and opened the lid. The laughter stopped. Inside the case, nested in custom-cut foam, was a Barrett MRAD. Not the standard military issue variant, but a precision build chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, fitted with a Night Force Advanced Tactical Rifle Scope.
Davis walked over. You qualified on this platform?
Yes.
Where?
I'd rather just shoot if you do.
Fine. Lane 12. 800 meters, standard qualification target, 5 rounds, whenever you're ready.
5 rounds, whenever you're ready. Sophia nodded.
A titanium muzzle brake, and a suppressor that alone cost more than most of the men on this line earned in a month. The rifle was not new. The finish on the receiver had the matte wear of something that had been carried through dust and rain and altitude, used hard and maintained harder. The bolt handle showed the polished groove where thousands of cycles had worn the metal smooth. Every sniper on the line recognized that rifle for what it was. Not a showpiece, a working tool, the kind of weapon that gets built for one purpose and one shooter. Davis walked over. He looked at the Barrett.
800 meters downrange, the target registered a hit.
Then at Sophia. You qualified on this platform? Yes. Where? I'd rather just shoot if that's all right. Davis stared at her for a beat. Fine. Lane 12, 800 meters. Standard qualification target. 5 rounds, whenever you're ready. Sophia nodded. She assembled the rifle with a fluidity that came from repetition so deep it had become reflex. Hands moving without hesitation, each component clicking into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. Bipod deployed, suppressor threaded, scope caps lifted. She dropped prone behind the rifle, settled her cheek against the stock, and adjusted her position in micro movements so small they were almost invisible.
There's a 200-meter lane open, he said carefully.
Thank you, but I was hoping for the farthest range.
She loaded 5 rounds of Lapua Sina into the magazine, seated it, and cycled the bolt. The first shot broke the silence like a hammer on glass. 800 meters downrange, the target registered a hit, dead center. The spotters confirmed it before the sound had finished rolling across the desert. 4 more rounds followed in methodical succession, each one landing within a circle no wider than a man's fist.
Like it was a warm-up drill. What I... Okay, the honest answer in the comments.
Davis checked the score sheet. 5 for 5. All center mass. Grouping tighter than 90% of the men who had shot that same lane this week. He said nothing, but the clipboard in his hand tilted slightly, and Sophia noticed. Is there a longer lane available? She asked. Davis blinked. In 9 years, he had never had a shooter on their first qualification pass ask for more distance. Shooters asked for better optics, better ammo, a different lane with less crosswind. They asked for excuses.
I wasn't planning to leave. I wasn't planning to leave.
They never asked for harder. There's a 1,200-meter lane open, he said carefully. What about the long line, the 2,000 plus? Davis looked at her the way a man looks at someone who just asked to pet a rattlesnake. That lane requires major approval. Then I'd like to speak with the major. Now, if you were standing on that firing line watching this unfold, watching a woman in civilian clothes calmly request access to the longest shooting lane on a military facility after grouping 5 rounds into a fist-sized cluster like it was a warm-up drill, what would you be thinking?
Polar service record, full jacket, everything.
Yes, sir.
drop your honest answer in the comments, because the instructors on that line were thinking something very specific, and most of them were dead wrong. The radio on Davis's belt crackled before he could answer. Davis, this is Driscoll. Major Whitmore is inbound, ETA 15 minutes. He wants the civilian on the line when he arrives. Do not, repeat, do not let her leave. Davis looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at the distant target frames shimmering in the heat. Guess you're staying, Davis said. I wasn't planning to leave.
You know my rank, but I don't know yours. That's a problem.
I don't have a rank, sir.
Major Aaron Whitmore arrived in a dust-covered Humvee with 2 aides and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same sandstone as the canyon walls surrounding the range. He was the facility commander, a decorated infantry officer with 3 combat deployments, a Silver Star, and a well-known impatience for anything that disrupted his training schedule.
Who are you? But
Colonel, we have a situo. Oh! What is this, Major? Read it.
You know who I am now.
The fact that a civilian woman with no file had appeared on his range with a classified authorization letter had disrupted his entire afternoon. He did not introduce himself to Sophia. He walked directly to Driscoll, took the letter, read it, and then read the fine print at the bottom that Driscoll had missed. His jaw tightened. Pull her service record.
The name at the top matched the
I know.
woman sitting 6 feet away.
He told one of his aides. Full jacket. Everything. Sir, the authorization is classified above our... Then call someone who has the clearance. I want to know who she is before she fires another round on my range. While the aide made phone calls from the tower, Whitmore walked the line. He stopped behind lane 12, where Sophia was sitting on the bench, hydrating from a metal canteen, the Barrett MRAD resting on its bipod like a sleeping predator. Major, Sophia said. Not a greeting, an acknowledgement. You know my rank, but I don't know yours, Whitmore said. That's a problem. I don't have a rank, sir. I'm a civilian. Civilians don't carry .338 Lapua precision rifles built to military spec. Civilians don't get authorization letters signed above division level. And civilians don't group like that at 800 meters cold bore. He pointed at the target sheet Davis was still holding. So, I'll ask once, who are you? Before Sophia could answer, the aide appeared at the major's shoulder, holding a tablet.
Your longest confirmed shot, he said slowly, 2,580 meters.
The expression on the aide's face had changed. It was the expression of someone who had just read something that rewired their understanding of the last 30 minutes. Sir, the aide said quietly, you need to see this. The screen showed a service jacket.
But since you've already read it, yes.
Heavily redacted, but readable in the sections that mattered. The name at the top matched the woman sitting 6 feet away. Below the name was a designation that made the major's hand tighten around the tablet's edge. In the world of long-range precision shooting, the chain of command follows a rigid structure. A sniper attached to a regular infantry unit answers to a platoon sergeant. A sniper in a ranger battalion answers to a company commander. A sniper in a special operations unit answers to a task force lead. And a sniper whose file is classified above division level, whose missions are referenced only by alphanumeric codes, whose confirmed engagement distances read like typographical errors. That sniper answers to people whose names do not appear on any public roster. Sophia Langley's file contained 7 redacted mission entries, 2 commendations that had no ceremony attached.
See that? Look!
Leave me alone. Let me think.
A marksmanship record that included a confirmed engagement at a distance the Major had to read 3 times, because the number did not seem possible. And a discharge date from 11 months ago, listed as voluntary with distinction. Whitmore handed the tablet back to his aide without a word.
And if you guessed early on that with a nice rifle.
You knew it coming before the Major did? Hit that like and let us know in the comments when you did.
He looked at Sophia. Your longest confirmed shot, he said slowly, is listed at 2,580 meters.
You think you're ready for this?
The firing line went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from people choosing not to speak. The kind that comes from people forgetting how.
Give me a minute.
That's classified, sir, Sophia said evenly. But since you've already read it, yes. The difference between a classified file and a redacted file is not just bureaucratic. A redacted file means the information exists and someone has decided you do not need to see all of it. Black bars cover names, dates, locations. But the structure remains. You can see the shape of what happened even if the details are hidden. A classified file, by contrast, means the information itself is considered dangerous. Not embarrassing, not sensitive, dangerous. The kind of file that lives on servers with no internet connection, in buildings with no windows, reviewed only by people who signed documents acknowledging that sharing its contents constitutes a federal crime. Sophia's file was the second kind. The fact that Whitmore's aide had been able to pull even the fragments he showed on that tablet meant someone, somewhere in the chain of command, had made a deliberate decision to let this facility commander see just enough to understand who was standing on his range. Corporal Briggs, standing 4 lanes away, whispered something to the man next to him. The man did not respond.
By the time it arrived,
He was doing mental math, and the math was telling him that 2,580 meters was over 1.6 miles, which placed it among the longest confirmed shots in recorded military history. And if you guessed early on that Sophia was not just some civilian with a nice rifle, if you saw it coming before the Major did, hit that like button right now and let us know in the comments when exactly you figured it out. Prove it, Major Whitmore said. She had expected him to say something like that. Not because she knew Whitmore personally, but because she knew the type. Career infantry officers who had earned their rank through blood and sand did not accept classified files as proof of anything. For them, proof was performance. Always had been, always would be. And truthfully, she understood it. Sophia sat behind the Barrett MRAD at the far end of the range, lane 20, the only lane that extended to the facility's maximum distance. The target was a standard E-type silhouette, steel, mounted on a frame at 2,580 meters. At that distance, even through the Night Force scope's highest magnification, the target was barely distinguishable from the terrain behind it.
I was trusting the math. My gut screamed that a target 1.6.
A grey sliver against a brown canvas of rock and scrub. She had 17 minutes to set up. That was how long it took the range crew to drive out, confirm the target placement, and drive back. 17 minutes alone with the rifle and the wind. The Barrett MRAD chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum was not a rifle that forgave. It was a bolt-action precision platform designed for extreme long-range engagement, and at this distance, every variable multiplied exponentially. A 1-degree error in windage calculation would push the round over 18 feet off target by the time it arrived. A miscalculation in elevation of even half a minute of angle meant the bullet would either sail over the silhouette or plow into the dirt 50 meters short. And the flight time, at 2,580 meters, the round would be in the air for nearly 4 seconds. 4 seconds during which the wind could shift, the temperature could change the air density, and the rotation of the Earth itself would nudge the bullet fractionally east of where she aimed. Sophia adjusted the scope. She had already calculated the base elevation, dialing 78 minutes of angle into the turret.
Major Whitmore. 2 aides. Captain Driscoll.
Each click precise, each number confirmed against the data she carried in her head like a second language. The 338 Lapua Sina round she was loading weighed 300 grains. At the muzzle, it would leave the barrel at roughly 2,750 feet per second. By the time it reached the target, it would have slowed to subsonic speed, crossed through at least 3 distinct wind layers, and dropped over 200 feet from its original trajectory. The math was not the hard part. The math could be taught to anyone with patience and a calculator. The hard part was trusting the math when every instinct in the body screamed that a target 1.6 miles away was too far, too small, too impossible. She had done this before, in places she would never name, against targets she would never discuss, under conditions that made this clear desert range feel like a backyard. But every shot was its own universe. The rifle did not remember the last time it hit. The wind did not care about her record, and the round in the chamber had no idea it was supposed to be historical. Her breathing slowed, not consciously. It was a response trained into her nervous system through years of repetition, a conditioned deceleration that dropped her heart rate below 60 beats per minute and steadied the micro-tremors in her hands to near zero. Combat breathing, the instructors at the schoolhouse had called it. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 counts out. But that was the textbook version. The real version, the one operators used in the field, was simpler and harder. You stopped thinking about breathing entirely. You let the body run itself, while the mind narrowed to a single point of focus, so intense that the rest of the world went dark. Behind her, the entire range had gathered. 18 snipers, 6 instructors, Major Whitmore, 2 aides, Captain Driscoll. They stood in a loose semicircle behind the tower. Binoculars and spotting scopes trained downrange, and not one of them spoke. The wind flag at the 1,000-meter mark fluttered left. The one at 1,500 meters was nearly limp. The one at 2,000 was angled right, a full-value crosswind that would push the round sideways by a margin most shooters would not even know how to calculate. Sophia saw all 3 flags in her peripheral vision. She did not adjust the scope. Instead, she held her aim point offset into the wind by an amount that existed only in her instinct. A correction born not from a formula, but from 10,000 rounds fired in conditions exactly like this. The trigger on the MRAD broke at 2.2 pounds. She had tuned it herself years ago, filing the sear engagement until it released with the crispness of snapping a dry twig. It was the kind of trigger that forgave nothing. If the shooter flinched, if a heartbeat pulsed at the wrong millisecond, if a single muscle in the hand contracted involuntarily, the round went wide. She laid her finger on the trigger blade and waited, not for courage, not for the wind to die. She waited for the moment between heartbeats, the fraction of a second where the body was perfectly still, where the crosshairs settled on the target like a compass finding north, and the shot broke itself. The men behind her did not know that she had named this moment privately years ago. She called it the gap, not the information gap that storytellers use to keep an audience watching, but the biological gap, the silence between one heartbeat and the next where the body is, for a fraction of a second, a perfectly still machine, a quarter second of absolute zero motion. Most shooters never find it because they are too busy looking for it. The gap does not respond to effort. It responds to surrender. You stop trying to be still, and the stillness finds you. Sophia surrendered. The crosshairs stopped moving. The desert swallowed sound in strange ways. At close range, the Barrett MRAD's report was a deep, authoritative crack that vibrated in the chest. At distance, it became something else, something that rolled outward like slow thunder, spreading across the flat terrain and bouncing off the canyon walls to the east until it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once.
Center mass. Whoa.
She hit center mass.
The round left the barrel at 2,750 feet per second. By the time the sound reached the spotters behind the tower, the bullet had already traveled 300 meters. A quarter second later, it crossed the 1,000-meter mark, still supersonic, still climbing on its ballistic arc. The drag coefficient of the 338 Lapua Sinar was among the lowest of any long-range projectile ever manufactured. A bullet designed by Finnish engineers to maintain velocity and stability at distances that would tumble lesser rounds into useless spirals. Even so, by 1,500 meters, the atmosphere was winning. Air resistance clawed at the copper jacket, slowing the spin, flattening the trajectory into a steepening curve that accelerated the descent. At 2,000 meters, the bullet was subsonic. It had dropped over 160 feet from its original line of flight. The crosswind at this altitude was pushing it sideways at a rate of almost 3 inches per 100 meters. Sophia's hold-off correction, the instinct-born offset she had applied before firing, was now the only thing keeping the round on a path that intersected with the target. 3.6 seconds after leaving the barrel, the round struck steel. The sound came back a full 8 seconds later, a distant flat clang that carried across the range like a bell rung in an empty church. Nobody moved. Staff Sergeant Davis was the first to lower his spotting scope. He did not say anything. He simply wrote a number on his clipboard and circled it twice. The number was the distance. The circle meant confirmed. Master Sergeant Holt stood with his binoculars frozen at his eyes for a count of 5, before his arms slowly came down to his sides. "Center mass," he said, almost to himself. "She hit center mass." The phrase rippled through the gathered men like a shockwave, with a delayed fuse. Center mass at 2,580 meters, not a wing shot. Not a lucky graze on the edge of the silhouette. Not a hit that could be attributed to a gust pushing the round into the target. Center mass. The round had struck the steel silhouette in the upper chest, exactly where a human heart would be. Corporal Briggs set his spotting scope down on the bench very carefully, as if the instrument might break if he handled it with the same carelessness he had shown 30 minutes ago when he joked about lending her a .22 caliber. His face had the blank, recalibrated expression of someone whose assumptions had been surgically removed. At the long distances this range facilitated, the terrain itself became a factor most shooters never had to consider. The range sat in a natural depression between two mesa formations, and the prevailing wind patterns funneled through this channel in unpredictable layers. At ground level, the wind might blow from the south at 8 knots. At 50 feet above the deck, it could shift northwest at 12.
Temple in an informal salute. Master Sergeant, while she was breaking down the Barrett.
And in the thermal layer, between 400 and 800 feet of altitude, where the bullet spent the majority of its flight time, the wind was a rolling, shifting mass of air currents that changed direction every 90 seconds.
You weren't the only one.
I wasn't. But I should have known better.
Reading these layers was not a skill taught in any classroom. It was learned the same way a sailor learned to read the sea.
It was an honor to watch you.
I watch you shoot.
Watch you shoot.
By watching, failing, adjusting, and watching again, year after year, until the patterns became as legible as printed words. Sophia had read them correctly. All of them, in a single shot. Major Whitmore stood apart from the group, his arms folded, his expression unreadable.
Sir, I accept.
He had spent 22 years in the infantry. He had watched snipers operate in 3 theaters of war. He had personally authorized more than 40 qualification evaluations at this facility. He had never seen anything like this. He turned to Driscoll. Get her file to division. Full debrief request. I want to know every mission she ran and every unit she was attached to. Sir, the file is classified above.
I don't think you do.
I know what it's classified above. Send the request anyway.
I think it's possible.
He paused. Then, quieter, so only Driscoll could hear, and put her name on the permanent range record. She just set a new facility distance mark by over 400 meters. The men on the firing line did not crowd her. That was the thing about experienced snipers. They understood the weight of what they had just witnessed, and they expressed it not through celebration or applause, but through a specific kind of silence. The silence of professionals recognizing mastery in their own craft. A few nodded as Sophia walked back from the shooting position. One, a quiet staff sergeant from 2nd Ranger Battalion, whose name she never learned, simply touched 2 fingers to his temple in an informal salute. Master Sergeant Holt approached her while she was breaking down the Barrett. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. Sophia looked up. For what? For what I was thinking when you got out of that car. She almost smiled. You weren't the only one. Holt nodded. No, I wasn't. But I should have known better. 23 years in the service, and I still judged the book by the cover. He extended his hand. It was an honor to watch you shoot. She shook it. Firm grip, brief, the way people shake hands when the gesture means something. Major Whitmore was the last to approach. He waited until the Barrett was cased, the brass collected, and the lane cleared. He stood in front of Sophia with his hands clasped behind his back, the way officers stand when they are about to say something that costs them. Miss Langley. Major, I requested you prove your record. You did. I want you to know that my request was not born from disrespect. He paused. It was born from disbelief. The number in your file is extraordinary, and I have learned over a long career that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I understand, sir. I don't think you do, Whitmore said. What I saw today changes the way I think about what is possible on this range, what is possible with that caliber, and frankly, what is possible from a shooter who was discharged 11 months ago and hasn't fired a round since. He looked at the cased Barrett. If you ever consider coming back in any capacity, there is a standing invitation at this facility. Sophia picked up her rifle case and her duffel. I appreciate that, Major. Truly. She did not say whether she would come back. She did not explain why she had left in the first place, or what it cost her to be here today, or how many nights in the last 11 months she had lain awake in her small house in Prescott, Arizona, listening to the silence and wondering if the best part of her life was already behind her. What the men on that firing line would never know, what the file did not contain, and no debrief would ever reveal, was that Sophia Langley had left the service not because she wanted to, but because the weight of what she had done across 7 classified missions had settled into her bones like lead. She was the best at what she did, and what she did was end things from a distance that made the act feel both godlike and inhuman. She had walked away not from failure, but from excellence, because the excellence had started to cost pieces of herself she could not name and could not replace. Coming back to a range, any range, was not a test of marksmanship. It was a test of whether she could still hold a rifle without hearing the echoes of every shot she had ever taken. She passed the test. She just walked back across the firing line, past the men who had laughed when she arrived, and now stood in respectful silence as she left. Past the range tower where Captain Driscoll was already on the phone, speaking in the low, urgent tones of a man relaying information that would reach offices with no windows and doors that required 2 keys to open. The gravel parking lot was empty, except for her truck and the desert wind. She loaded the Barrett into the back seat, closed the door, and stood for a moment with her hand on the roof, looking east toward the mesa line, where the sun was beginning its slow descent into orange and gold. Somewhere behind her, a recruit was asking Staff Sergeant Davis what had just happened. Davis's answer carried across the still air. 4 words that would become the unofficial record of that afternoon at Fort Whitfield. The Queen came through. Sophia got in the truck and drove south, the Barrett MRAD riding behind her like a sleeping promise, the desert stretching wide and gold and endless ahead. And on lane 20, the steel silhouette at 2,580 meters still held the mark of her round, a dime-sized crater in the center of its chest, cooling slowly in the evening wind. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of that shot and the silence that followed, then you already know this channel is where you belong. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and stay locked in, because the next story coming to this channel is about a woman who walked into a combat zone with no weapon and walked out carrying 3 wounded operators on her back. You do not want to miss it.